Hello, chess friends. This is International Master Valeri Lilov, and today we're going to be talking about chess openings. More importantly, I'm going to tell you my take on how you can understand and improve your chess openings. Now, I got a lot of questions that you guys have been asking me about, openings and how to understand them and what to do. So today we're going to be talking really about everything that's regarding openings. I'm not going to be talking about specific openings so much as I'm going to talk about strategy of the openings, how to study openings, how to improve in your openings, and how to get better overall at the opening. Now, before I begin, I want to tell you that the problem that a lot of players have about openings comes from the fact that they don't understand it. Like, they don't actually understand what is the importance of learning the opening. Like, they think it's all about just setting up the pieces right and making sure that if you know more than your opponent, you're going to get an advantage. And that's rarely the truth. The truth is that when you're setting up the opening, you are creating the structure. That same structure which will further on guide your middle game plan and pretty much everything you do in the game. So it's pretty important to get it right. How do we do that? Now, to show you this, I would like to show you a couple of really interesting examples. Now, who is the best opening player in the world? Now, apparently, you're thinking, I'm not sure, Wesley So? Yes, he is one of the best. Right now, in my opinion, he is the best prepared player in the world. He is better than anyone else in terms of his preparation. And I loved seeing how he handles the openings. But in my opinion, the strongest opening strategist is Magnus Carlsen. He has publicly said that he, doesn't care so much about openings as much as the middle game. And in fact, I completely agree with him because the reality is opening is just to get you to a fine middle game. But remember this, you need to know the strategic highlights to make it work. And it's actually very simple things. It's not that complicated. But let me show you, in my opinion, how Carlsen does it in his games. So you can take a little bit of that and bring it to your own games in order to make them successful. So we're going to look at a few incredible openings by Magnus, with which he showed what you have to care about first and foremost. I'm going to bring the first one now, so just give me 1 second. Okay, hold on. Now, the first one that we're going to see was actually played between Carlsen and Nakamura. It's pretty interesting because Nakamura, everybody knows it. Like, he's the greatest player. Now there are like three: Wesley So, Nakamura and Caruana from United States. They're fantastic. Yet Carlsen has a huge result versus Nakamura. And this game that was played in 2008 was in Carlsen, one of the best years by Carlsen, actually. So I want to show you what it led to because the opening was hilarious. Take a look at that. Okay. So Nakamura actually started this game with d4. So Carlsen was black. He played knight f6, c4, e6. And actually, no, it was played in 2014. My bad. It wasn't 2008. It was 2014. So c4, e6, knight c3, bishop to the b4. And then it was f3. Now, a lot of us see openings of that kind. In fact, openings of that kind happen all the time. They do, because the reality is we realize variations and like positions that are just like this one. So what do we do? Okay. The first thing is, when you see an opening that you don't know or you don't understand, do not begin by saying, okay, I'm not sure what to do. Let's just try to figure out a good move. You got to do two things. First thing, stick as much as possible to the typical plan you've studied in your openings. And second, stick to the principles. In fact, the second is even more important than the first. Sticking to the principles, like controlling the center and getting this very easy development, is what you care about most. And that's what black did by playing the move of pawn to d5. He's able to get the control of the e4 and have what I call a stronghold. Now, I want you to remember that first concept of openings, the stronghold. The stronghold usually is related to a pawn in the middle or around the middle that's actually shielding your position and allows you this comfortable development behind it. I call it the shelf. The stronghold creates a shelf directly so that the opponent's pieces do not get the challenges. Like the pawn on d5 right now allows black to get a very comfortable development. And whether he's going to play with c5, knight c6, b6, bishop to the b7, or queen e7, or rook e8, this pawn is not going to let most of white's pieces to jump and attack. So this is the first thing that we do. We want to stick to the opening idea, which is ultimately the bishop on b4 comes out so it can challenge the knight and create a little bit of a problem with his center. And then you would like to also stick to the principles. Get a strong hold, fast development, and make sure it's more active. So white played a3. And now, of course, black did not want to lose the bishop pair, because if he does lose the bishop pair, well, white will have an advantage. So black had to move the bishop back. Remember, no huge exchanges should happen in the early stage of the game. Let's just do it this way. Bishop e7, e4, exchange, and f takes c. And now we have this unique situation where basically it looks like black played most horribly. White got the center. He got the open space in a couple of moves only. He's going to get his knight. He's going to get his bishop. He's going to castle. He'll play e5. He's going to do it all in literally no time. And it's going to hurt. So my question to you guys is, okay, it's going to hurt. So what does black get to play right now? What would you suggest he has got to play right now? Now, while you're thinking about that, I'd like to answer a couple of questions. One of you said, could normal players handle pawn tension? I don't know what you mean by normal players. I mean, if you're talking about, sane players, sure. I mean, if you're not playing from an asylum, I believe you should be able to, handle pawn tension. But yeah, pretty much normal or sane players could do that. Now, one of you said, okay, hey, I played first e4. Should I prepare first d4 and c4 and also? You can prepare any of those. But, my suggestion is take one at a time. If you start playing e4 and d4 and c4 and all the stuff, it's going to be a mumbo jumbo in your mind. And then you're not going to know any of those. You're not going to understand the typical positions of any of those. So it's not good. Now let's answer a couple of suggestions. Should we do c5? Possibly. But I mean, it's only going to just make white's pawns a little stronger. I don't know. Maybe it's a good idea. It's not a bad idea. c6, it's much more passive. So white can do e5. I mean, even after c5, actually, you can still play e5, I'm thinking. And then, it could become a little bit of a problem afterwards. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a good move, c5. But Carlsen found something even better than that. Okay, now, while you're thinking, I just wanted to say that, this lecture is kind of a good way for me to bring you a fantastic offer that iChess is actually making. They're offering 50% off my new course on how to understand chess openings. It contains like 16 hours of opening training, and you can actually check the link below this video. The discount is only available for like a few hours, like after during and after the webinar. And I'm also going to post a link on the chat window, so you can also access that one from the box below. Now, I just got a suggestion. e5. It's a very good move. Absolutely. It's a terrific move, and we need to do it. See, Carlsen knew very well that an early attack is never supposed to work. If somebody makes an early attack to you, ask yourself, did I make any mistake? And if you can't remember of a major mistake or a way that you broke the rules, you have to know that probably he's the one who's wrong. So the move e5 is a fantastic counter, because in case white plays d takes to d, what black is just going to do, queen takes d1 check, knight takes d1, and knight g4. not only getting the chance to win the pawn in the middle. Actually, not that. Maybe in this case we can even play knight x d4. What am I talking about? We can just take that pawn. But I was thinking after queen takes d, if he takes with the king, we can do knight g4. Not only winning that pawn in the middle, but also leaving white with an isolated pawn over there. It was a pretty powerful idea as it happened. So now white plays d5. Okay, so obviously white's tactic did not work. Still gets some good-looking pawns, but it's not that perfect. So what do we do next? I mean, it's a pretty good position. As I've mentioned before, it's super important that you get a good structure. Now, to get a good structure, you oftentimes need to visualize. And now we get to the real core of becoming good at openings. Getting good at openings isn't about reading a lot of openings. It isn't about knowing a lot of variations and many sequences. Neither it's actually about thinking, okay, how much further I can take this, like pawn or that knight. In fact, most of these things matter in one way or another, but they're not going to make you good at openings. They're just going to give you a little bit of a strength in certain areas. And yet, alone, those type of things are not enough. It reminds me, there was this very interesting old story about the world champion Alexander Alihan, who came at an old club in Portugal. I think it was the 1940s, and he went on to play a game against someone who didn't even know that he was playing against the world champion. So obviously, like, they played a game, and Alekhine won. And in the end of the game, the amateur just said, I mean, how is this possible? I mean, like, I read every single line of the opening I played, and then you played this very weird knight move, and then you just destroyed all my preparations. How's that possible? I've read everything. And Alekhine looked at him and he said, that's because the best opening book is me. And even though that sounded a little weird, he smiled. But you see, it's actually true. The opening books and the opening moves are invented by people. So essentially, people make mistakes. People may not notice something. Especially when the opponent deviates, we have a new line that's probably going to be written in some future book. But right now, it's new. So what you need to do is think on your own. The first thing you would like to think about is outline. Now, I always say it, nobody does that. Most people are lazy in terms of setting up an outline. And it's important that you do this in the opening, or you start within the opening, because ultimately that's what it's all about. You want to make a blueprint of your actual development to come, and to figure out the potential problems and the right order to do so. What Carlsen did in this position, I mean, what I would think about probably is going to be something of the kind like a5, knight a6, knight c5, short castles, and most likely bishop g4, queen b7. But then, if Carlsen looks at something like that, he's probably going to find out, yeah, well, the potential problems could be that if we do go with something like a5 and all these moves, white could still prepare a move like b4 to challenge the knight. He could probably challenge the bishop with h3. And so Carlsen chose a slightly different blueprint. And I think that his worked actually a little bit better. He decided that as a development, it may be a great idea if we include moves like short castles, bishop g4, bishop c5, knight bd7, and potentially a5. That way we can open up the road for the queen eventually, and it's also going to look very active. In fact, sometimes you got to come up with 2 or 3 different blueprints and figure out the potential problems and how they will look. But this is so much better than simply following book lines. Everybody loves the book lines because it's a fixed formula. And truth is, the formula in chess depends on you. Oftentimes, there is some knowledge, some base to use, but you're the one who can create your formula. And then black actually did bishop c5. He started with the move that was most active. Then he continued with the move of short castles. And he followed it exactly the way he figured it out with the bishop g4. If you think only one move at a time, it's almost never going to work, because that one move at a time is going to leave you with an unsatisfying finale. It's gonna bring you to a position that you may not like your pieces, and you're going to take many moves to readjust them on better positions, and you certainly don't want that. So essentially, after h3, bishop takes f3, and then queen takes f3. Now this was black, where he played knight d7, and white simply castled long. Black did bishop to the d4, and white simply did knight e2. So now we're going to go to the second part of the opening, but I just wanted to show you how necessary it is in order to get a comfortable position to visualize. Visualizing is hard, and it means that you have to be immersed in the game from the very beginning. But you know what? If you do it, you will have a good opening. You're not going to have a winning opening. That depends on your opponent, and oftentimes people don't blunder. I mean, I'm talking about the good players. But you can have a good opening. And as opposed to having that, dream of getting this brilliant winning tactical opening, like that will help us to destroy our opponent. That's why a lot of people like traps. But then when people avoid them, obviously your preparation goes nowhere. Instead of having that dream of just having this beautiful finale in a brilliant short game, you can actually rely on a lot more strategic approach, which is real, and it's going to help you no matter what you play. In reality, white tried knight e2, and now black had to make a choice what to do about this bishop. So once again, I'd like to open it for questions. So anybody who has a question, just please let me know on the chat, or you can actually bring your suggestion on what black should do in this case. So what should black go for? Now, okay, one of you asked, suggest some repertoire with white to avoid king's Indian defense. Well, if you are playing d4, there's really no way to avoid it except to go with like systems like the London, the Tory attack, and whatever. Once again, I'm going to recommend you this new course that I have about chess openings, because it provides a lot of these ideas on how to avoid unpleasant openings. I think it has also how to avoid king's Indian defense in one of the chapters. And yeah, I will recommend you to take a look at it. It's 50% off just for a few hours. Check the link below the video. Now, what's the best thing to do before a tournament game? Thank you. That's a good question. What's the best thing to do? Sleep well. That's my suggestion number one. And I'm not joking. I am not joking. Do you know how many people feel terribly tired as they play the game? Or if they don't feel that tired, they play like tired. If you are playing a game, I think Anand said it, that he's actually likes to take a nap before a game, and I do like to this too. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be too long. 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Relax your body. Take a nap. Sleep it, and then when you do that, you trick your brain like you've actually had a good sleep. You wake up, and your mind is clear. You don't think about all the different things that you had to do during the day. And then you're able to play good chess. That's pretty much it. So there it is, c5. Very good suggestion. Thank you. Now, you see, we can't escape with the bishop. One of the important things that makes an actual opening structure great is the activity. When you stand more active than your opponent, then you have a good opening. If you don't stay more active, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a bad opening. It just means that you have a limited opening, and you have to find the possibilities to get it back on its feet. And it's hard. It's extremely difficult. You don't want that. See, Carlsen's openings are unique because he's always able to get that activity in place. If white did the en passant, which you may be wondering what would happen if he did, then actually black would have done beatings to the scene. And you realize that the exchange on the d4 doesn't really help him. Why not? He's winning a pawn, right? Yes. But then black is going to get an open file directly to attack the white king. And given that how open and how sharp this position is, I certainly would not say that the extra pawn, which is actually weak and attacked, is going to be that good, as it goes. In case of rook to the d1, most likely, there could be a move of rook a to the b8. And then after b4, we can have the move of a5 come into play. So it's actually pretty interesting, and well, honestly, quite a bit difficult as it goes. It's just not a very good position. See, black, emphasizes on the importance of really bringing more pieces into play. So actually, that was a great way to go. So and this is most interesting in the position, especially with the a5 move in place. It's beautiful. Well, truth is, after g4, a5, king to b1, and now there was the move of rook to the a6. He still got into a fine position, but there was a genuine problem that got him in a terrible, terrible position. Now you're probably thinking, Valeri, you were supposed to show us a good game of Carlsen. So where did you go wrong? I mean, after a5 and rook a6, he did go wrong. White was just played knight g3, and now we see a position in which the rook itself can hardly do that much. I mean, you can go to b6, and that's it. Rook h2, black is fairly limited. I mean, it looked so good just a moment ago. What happened? That's partly why I wanted to show you this game, because when you're playing the opening, you must understand that it doesn't matter how it looks right now. Right now is not important at all. When you think about the opening moves and the structure you build, it's about long term. So when you think about a move like c5, you've got to ask yourself the question, not how does it look right now, because it looks beautiful, but how is it going to look in 10 moves from now? Like, what do I mean by that? Well, think about, how is this move going to help me? Or how is this bishop or those pawns, how are they going to look in comparison to my opponent's play in the next 10 moves? Now that means that you have to really dig deep, and then instead of calculating, try to picture where the pieces are going. But most people take the easy way, including Carlsen in this game. Even though he is incredible at setting up openings, he actually fell for the very common trap. And I imagine this is done by a world champion. The world champion did that mistake. Now, if I ask whether you make that mistake, I actually don't think I should ask, because anybody does it. If the world champion does it, everybody does that mistake in one game or another. We think about a move in terms of how it looks now. c5 was an awesome looking move. But in the end of the day, as the game progressed, we realized that despite black's cool-looking rook and a bishop and how everything went, he had a bad opening structure. He had a structure which, in reality, after white played with h4, didn't give him even the chance to play b5 because there was c6 to the b. And even if he didn't play a5, which you maybe were thinking was actually the bad move, some will say, okay, probably a6 would have been fine, you'd still not be able to do much. Why? Well, it's because after the move of b5, I'm thinking that white can just do knight f5, and then we could see it eventually in case of rook to the b8, or rook h2, b4 with the pawn, and then the move of, say, rook to the d3. There was nothing that black's pieces were going to do, or maybe even a4. It's not bad. It's just not good. It's not very good. Not really. I mean, eventually we see b takes a8, rook takes a3, queen b6. You're probably thinking, all right, this is good counterplay. This is good stuff. Think about it. How long it's going to be that good? I think right now all that white has to do is rook a2, and that's it. It looks like he's passive. It looks like a terrible rook. But think about yours. Think about that knight and the fact that the bishop can't do much. I'm not saying black is lost. I'm just saying he has a bad game. And it's clearly visible when white just really jumps back. You can play moves like bishop h4 and g5. And I don't know if this would have gone as bad for black. Probably he's got some stuff. But the reality is, it's not the kind of perspective position that we dreamed or that we talked to ourselves. So was there a better way that he could have played this? Oh, yeah. But you see, it's not about thinking how it looks now. it was about discovering how the position is going to look in the next few, like the next 5 to 10 moves. And the reality is that all that Black really wanted to do was to actually figure out 3 things. The element of development, which is the first element that you want to figure out when you're setting up your structure. How and where to develop my pieces so that they're most active. The element of pawn structure. How do we set the pawn structure so that it gives us better plan eventually in the middle game? You can always pitch yourselves which area of the board you would like to play on and how to move the pawns down there. And 3, the most important thing is actually to figure out a good set of moves to do those 2 things. So I say maybe a move like rook e8, and eventually we can challenge you first c6. And they could have played queen to the b6 and maybe knight c5. How about that? I mean, in comparison to the old position that we have a little bit of a problem with, if we play it with a move of rook e8, of course, in case of the trade takes, I still don't think that this is going to work because of if exchange takes and this happens, we can have queen to e7 and queen e5 and knight takes d4. I mean, this pawn's going to fall for sure. So white can't do that. On the other hand, if you play g4 just like before, maybe we could just play c6. And now you realize the difference between c5 and c6. In the longer run, I believe c6 could give us the chance to think about b5 or c6 to the d, or even queen b6, which I find much more important. And now, Black had real counterplay. This was so much better. It's interesting to see the real beginning of this game because it looked like Carlsen had everything figured out, and yet for one moment he relaxed and he said c5 and I look great. And that's the point where you got to tell yourself, okay, is this really like that? Like, how is this going to work in the longer run? In the longer run, he figured out a6 and b5 does not work, possibly because of the things that I mentioned. Even though it would have been probably a little bit better in this position, I still don't think it was so good. And the most interesting thing is, in the longer run, the pawn structure was too bad. So pawn structure is more or less one key thing to care about, but it doesn't matter if you don't figure out the piece places. So the piece placement for Black should have been rook e8, c6, queen b6, and knight c5, combining those 2 elements into one, combining the idea of developing our pieces actively and setting the right pawns formation is what actually helps us to create structure. And there are all kinds of different structures, but the one element that basically differentiates a good structure in the opening from a bad structure in the opening is that a good structure will provide you with the freedom or flexibility to do stuff with your pieces. Say whatever you can about openings that don't actually give you activity in the beginning, maybe later, but you're going to see that even in those openings like Kingside, you still have the flexibility, you still have the control, even if it's just in a specific area of the board. Every opening that makes you passive, blocked, and closed in with less activity for your pieces, or a very little one, like in this case it was c5, only one file for Black to go for, it's not good. It's going to lead to many problems, and when you get the structural problems, no matter what your plan is and how good you're in the middle game, it's not going to work. That's what happened in this game. So it's an interesting idea to understand what structure is. What a player of Carlsen's caliber did bad. I mean, by the way, he won that game. He started out of a terrible opening, and he won that game because Nakamura made some mistakes later on. I mean, he had a completely winning position, but he messed it up. It was like he made a terrible blunder around the end. But the opening was a disaster. It started out well, and it turned into a disaster. So you could see if somebody from Carlsen's caliber can make that mistake, anybody could make it. But that doesn't mean we cannot learn and do it better. Not better than him, better than what we're doing it right now. So I want to actually show you a little bit of an experience of mine before I move on to the next part of this lecture, which is going to be a little more about learning openings and how you can do it more effectively. I've often talked about an experience that I had some years ago, I went on to play a championship. That was actually the final for the man championship in the country. Now this was a very strong tournament, by the way. It was a big tournament because we had pretty much every strong grandmaster, or almost every strong grandmaster, playing out there. So it was a big, big tournament. And what was actually so interesting about this is I was really lazy. I mean, in that tournament, we had like what, say 7 or 8 grandmasters and many international masters. But almost every single game that I played, I ended up winning in the opening. It was so excruciatingly terrible for my opponents that when I was like walking down the hallway, I saw 2 of the players talking, whispering to each other, and one of them said, "If you play Lilov, do not go into book lines. He is booked up and he's going to kill you." And I couldn't just bear my laugh, because if they only knew I didn't read anything in terms of openings before the tournament, they would probably just not believe it. Because the reality is, they were so afraid that in the last round of the tournament, I played against a grandmaster who ran away in a bad position out of the opening just so that he doesn't have to face my non-existing preparation. It was hilarious. So how did I do it? How did I not prepare for any of the games against grandmaster players and actually end up well in the opening? Well, it wasn't so hard, I'm gonna try to show you a few exercises from my games in that tournament. I haven't shown those before, and I think you're gonna get a clear or pretty good idea on what I was able to do that effectively when I was playing. So I'm gonna start with a game that actually happened. I played against a grandmaster, and I destroyed him in 20 moves. I mean, it's not one of my best games because later on I messed up a little bit, but the opening was just awful for him. And it wasn't because he wasn't prepared. In fact, he was quite well prepared. Let me show it to you. First, I want to copy this game. By the way, if any of you guys want to have a PGN file of those games, please email me to my email. I'm going to put it on the chat right now. It is valeri.lilov@gmail.com, or my website is tigerlilov.com. And I will really I really appreciate if anybody could write to me. And also, do not forget to check the training package, the 16 hours, at 50% off. It's like $50 or something, only for a few hours right now. So the offer is going to expire, I think, at midnight. So please, you could take a look at that. It has a lot of good stuff. If you have a question, you can just send me a message on my email or through my site. Now, let me show you this experience. Okay, so here we go. I'm just going to have to copy the game, so bear with me for 1 second. There it is. I'd like to answer a couple questions just before I start. One of you asked, okay, so let's see. How can you tell whether the e5 was good for black in previous game and when it looks like white has a big space advantage with 3 center pawns? It wasn't about the pawns and how they look. Remember, it's never about how they look. It's about what those pawns could give him. The pawns in the middle that he had didn't do anything for him. So you see, it's important. Now, one of you asked, Valeri, how can white's player always have more chances of winning, yet if better player is playing with the black against it's not so good opponent can win? I don't understand that question. I don't think that white has more chances of winning. Yes, he has a slightly better advantage with white, but that's not true. He doesn't get to win. Okay, now one of you asked, the board and the notation are very blurry. They are because you have to increase the from your settings, from the YouTube setting, player setting, you have to increase the quality to 720 HD. So that will increase the resolution. Now, how would you rank the following: space, material, activity, center control, king, safety, pawn structure, open lines, and threats? All of them are important. All of them. There is no more or less important. So all of them are. Now, one of you asked a question: should I read become stronger at chess, or playing is enough? Playing is not going to make you stronger. It's going to give you experience to test on what you've read. But certainly, I will recommend you to study tactics books. I think that Yusupov's tactics books are pretty good. I like those as well. There's a series that I would really recommend. And one of you asked how to find you correct moves in complex positions. Oh boy, wouldn't you like to know? I think that finding correct position moves in complex positions. If I knew the answer of that, I would probably be a world champ. No, this is a topic for a different lecture. By the way, I'm kidding, but it's a topic for a different lecture. Now, here we go. This is my game. Let's get back to the game now. So I was playing white. Yeah. And my opponent started, I started the game with e4, c5, knight f3, e6. It was d4. He exchanged. Now, you probably know this is the Sicilian shit. Like, he played the Sicilian can. I did bishop d3. Now, I will lie if I tell you that I didn't prepare at all for this game. My dad sent me a bunch of his games, I think, with some, lengthy analysis, and I think he said, read that. I was like, what? No way. I'll forget it. And I'm a very forgetful person, by the way. Some may say, Valeri, just how can you say that in on air? Well, I like to say it because it's true. I forget lines. I even had one line that I prepared and I made a DVD about, and then I went to play against the Grandmaster and I messed up the move order. I felt embarrassed, very embarrassed, but that's just what happens. And that's why I don't rely on memorizing moves, and I don't think that's the right way to study openings in general. As Nimzovich said, try not to memorize. Understanding the opening moves and the plans is going to be what actually frees you from the slavery of memorizing lines. And he said it like 120 years before I was born, I think, or something like that. So anyway, the first thing that I wanted to do, I knew that I'm supposed to put my bishop over here. I knew I'm supposed to develop my queen over to e2. And I knew I was supposed to gain more space. That's all I needed. I call this the highlights of the opening. Now, think about it like that. An opening is like, I would call it more of a labyrinth with many different ways to go. There is no way to explore all of them and understand everything. So what you need to know are specific points in that labyrinth that if you reach, you know where to go from here. So you reach that point, I know, so, okay, I'm going to go left 500 meters. And there's another clue that, once you see it, okay, I'm going to go 1,000 meters to the right. Then you see another clue and you say, okay, I'm going to go 500 meters like straight up. And that's enough to get out of the labyrinth. Now, why am I using that similarity? Because if instead of remembering moves, you try to remember the major goals of the opening or the major highlights, that's all you really need. My major highlight here was to develop the pieces towards the center, try to gain more space, and make sure I stand more active. So even if I don't know or I don't remember the opening, because I got to tell you, I forgot it halfway through. I think I already had no idea what to do. I just said, okay, here is how I'm supposed to go. I put my queen. And I'd like to ask you guys, what would you say white should do right now? Just while you're actually thinking about this, I want to answer a few more questions. Well, let's see. What was your psychology going into this game, and how should it ideally be? My psychology, I was praying not to forget the line, and I did forget it. The more you think about the negative, it happens to you. I was like, if I forget the line, I'm going to kill myself. And I forgot the line, but it still worked out for me because I knew the features. I knew what I was going for. So even if I didn't remember the moves, however many times I replayed them on my computer, I still knew what I was going for, what the goal was, and I kind of came up with the moves as the game went. So one of you, okay, so let's see, what would you like to play as white? So what should it? And I developed knight c3, could go with the bind. Absolutely, bind him. The pawns are not just to give us open space for our pieces. Oftentimes, the real value of pawns in the opening comes when they actually restrict the opponent and when they take away his good space in terms of squares and pieces. So now with the c4 move, I'm taking away the two major ideas that black has in that opening. Now don't get me wrong, this is not a winning position for white. It just starts to look good. So he plays g6, and I was totally off the book right now, I think. Then bishop g7, and what do you think white should do? Okay, this is another really key moment for me, I think, when I was playing this game. And keep in mind, within the first 20 moves, I got a completely winning position. So we're going to see how. It's just that I want to pose these questions along the way to see what you guys think. Let's see. Anyone? Okay. f4 with an e5 attack. Yeah. But you know, I was really worried. If I play f4 right here, there is this very good chance he is going to attack me on the knight. And I was scared. Really scared. I mean, really, really scared. If he goes with a move like, say, I don't think he's got knight xd4, but maybe he can play, I don't know, knight d7 or knight c6. I didn't like that. So you know what I did? I broke my rule. I went backward. I went backward because I had this idea in mind. I didn't think of that move alone because that would have been a sin if I only played knight f3 for the sake of just trying to test my limits with the backward moves. What I wanted to do was to literally think of a structure, and I came up with an idea. If I play knight f3, rook d1, and actually I didn't think about knight f3 in the beginning. I like rook d1, then I'm going to think about maybe bishop e4, e3, rook c1, and this looks perfect. As an outline, it looks fantastic. But then there is an issue. He might actually play e5, knight g4. So I may not like to have that. Okay, if I play f4, e5 is even going to be worse for me because it's going to open his pieces. So essentially thinking about my opponent's response in terms of threat helped me to realize why some moves wouldn't work. So what if I do maybe a move like, you know, perhaps knight f3? If I do that, I'm going to have rook d1, maybe bishop to e, maybe not bishop e3, but let's say I can grab b3 and bishop b2, and then rook c1. That would look great. But then there's another problem. His bishop is going to get open, and maybe he's going to attack me on e4, so I can't do that. So maybe in that case, instead of b3, bishop b2, I may need to play something like bishop d2 so I can open my rooks. Yeah, this time the bishop is going to really stand in my way. But you know what? Because my pawns are controlling a lot of space, I can then think about moving my bishop once up. Yes, I'll spend a tempo, but I'll have my development complete with the least amount of complications. You see, there's no calculation here, not the kind of calculation that at least people do. You know, most players, even if they start calculating here, they don't. Usually they just play the move that looks good at this early in the game. But even later in the game, what they do is they'll say, okay, I go rook d1, he castles, I do this, he does that, I do this, he does that. It feels like trying to sort of go back and forth with your moves and his moves, and you don't even know if this is going to work like that. Instead, you have to think in schemes. The scheme of knight f3 is actually very good. And so what I was able to do, I actually thought, okay, so now I can even play h3. Maybe, in fact, in the end, I could still go with a move of bishop e3. But then after knight d7, I realized he was going to go to e5. So maybe play f5. So I had to make a choice what to do. So I guess we've got bishop f4, bishop e3, the d2 old square, or maybe something else like trying to regroup. What would you guys do here? Now, please define bind. Somebody just said that. Bind is when you feel binded. Like basically, this is the bind. Like the c4 sets bind on d5 and b5. I have never studied English, so please forgive me if this is actually not the correct term. It's just that the chess theoreticians call it the Marozzi bind. So that's how they call it. And yeah, so by the way, I've only learned English from experience, from practice, and that's why I may not be that familiar with the meaning or the actual terms. So anyway, what do we do now after the move of knight d7? Uh, does anybody have a suggestion? Hmm. This is a good question to actually ask yourself right now. Bishop C, no, he's going to do bishop. See, and this is the thing. I was so into the idea of playing bishop e3 that I was almost going to play it. But you see, this is the really important thing when you're outlining. Think about what your opponent is actually going to do in a menacing way. What I really hated was the fact that you can exchange this and create weaknesses. Now, this is what you want to avoid. And I'm not just talking about the double pawns. Any sort of endeavors in the opening that involve exchanges or huge tactics or shifting the structure, I want you to avoid it unless you're 100% sure it's going to work and it's going to be good for you. If you don't, it's likely not going to work. It's likely not going to be that good for you. So the most important thing is to avoid engaging tactics that early in the game. Start with something simple. Like my idea here with the bishop to the g2 was ultimately to keep it simple, develop my rook on the c1 square, and then gradually set my pieces up. I wouldn't say that I got a winning position right here, but I got a very comfortable opening. And that is far from the fantasy of just being able to win right at the beginning. And yet it is the realistic, you know, like happiness, I would call it that way, of being able to play a good opening. So after that, queen e4, knight e5, there's queen e2. And White's just in this blissful position with everything in place. He can take my bishop. I'm okay with that. And this is one of the worst pieces. And even if he doesn't, that's okay, because then I'm going to really regroup my pieces. Now we're starting the middle game, really. But then my structure is so good so that literally his both squares in d5 and b5 were prevented. And I just got a fantastic setup. I did queen f2. And now I played f5. So ultimately, after a couple moves, like when he exchanged, takes. I mean, by the way, his rating was 2,500. Just this is not my kind of making. He was 2,500. He was pretty strong. So this was his FIDE rating, not the national. If you Google him, you'll see his rating is around 2550 or so. So here, and then there was bishop e4. So exchange, take back, and I mean, he played this, and I did knight g3, and this was more or less the moment where he really started just becoming totally frustrated with everything that came. I mean, I'm not explaining this so much because I think you can get a pretty good picture of what's happening on the board right now, and that basically White is just destroying everything that Black has built, and Black hasn't built that much really, but. Let's go back to the beginning, because this is a really interesting part of the game. I had very little knowledge and very little memory of whatever I prepared in the morning. I had no idea of this opening because I've never played the Sicilian with bishop d3, and there's this rule that you should never play an opening that you have not at least tested. I was playing against a grandmaster who was actually, I saw in the database, he had many games with this, e6, a6. And I was able to receive a winning position after 20 moves. So what are, once again, the key concepts of succeeding in the opening? The first rule, make sure that you build structure. Structure isn't about creating threats. It's not about gaining, nice, special square for the piece. It's about two things, really. A strong combination of active pieces and pawns that guarantee you space. It's really that simple. The second very important role is you need to know the highlights of the opening. The highlights, as I call it, the small goals that the opening has. The gradual goals. Like my idea here, to support the center, to get more space with the pawns. Like, I thought about the c4 move. I knew that this exists. And then essentially, think about being able to back it up. And so the fast development, the control in space, and the backup was very efficient. And then the most valuable is thinking schemes. Forget about that mindless calculation, like I go here, he goes there, I go here, he goes there. That will only lead to a headache. And 80% of that sort of calculation, especially in the opening where you really don't know where you can go, It's like trying to calculate all the way from New York to Florida without even having to drive. So you're trying to calculate every possible roadblock. You can do that, but is it possible? It's hard. You better use an app to tell you if there is a roadblock, or you basically try to figure out which ones are the less heavy roads. That's where you cannot get stuck in traffic, for example. Here's an idea. So, in any case, the point behind it is that I just wanted a simple, easy opening to give me the chance to achieve the space, to get the activity and the center support that I learned I have to do. I forgot the moves, but I knew the idea, and the idea worked out like a charm. I got a fantastic middle game, and I got a 2500 Grandmaster in my pocket. So it's not that easy to do this, but you see, these are the core elements. Once you know them, you know what's really important about the opening. You know what this is really all about. And I tell you, if you check that tournament, you can check the database. All my games from that tournament. It was in 2008. It was like 9 years ago. Almost every single game I played was an opening disaster for my opponents. I mean, I like to believe it was luck, but I don't think it was. I think it was just good strategy, and of course a little bit of luck in turning that good strategy in solid and effectively winning positions. Of course you need luck. I mean, a lot of it in chess in general, and not only, but it was the structure that helped me in the opening. So once I got the lucky position, I could actually develop it further as well. So in any case, what I want to talk about right now, I want to open it again for questions. So please, guys, if you have any questions, just send it to me. Send them to me. But once again, if you want me to send you the BGNs of those games or those analysis to your email, please feel free to just write me to my email, which is actually valeri.lilov@gmail.com. I'm going to put it on the chat, or directly to my website, which is tigerlilov.com. You can feel free to do so, and I will be glad to answer any questions that you may have or any suggestions for an upcoming topic. So thank you for that. Now, there were a couple of things that I wanted to talk about, and I do want to talk about those. So one of the there were actually three things. The first thing is, okay, what is the Sicilian Scheveningen? Now, if you're ever looking for an opening that is easy to play, and if you want to get an active game, don't look for, many different systems in the Sicilian, because they could be confusing. I recommend the Scheveningen. And the Scheveningen is actually what happens in this, when you play with the move of d6 and e6. Now, the only problem with d6 and e6 in that very nice small center is that white can launch an attack. So looking at it from both sides, while you can definitely get a very good formation with this, if you're ever looking at that, if you play with white, or if you want to prepare against white, as well as it with any other opening, not just in the Scheveningen, prepare versus your opponent's strongest and most challenging attack. So for example, in case of knight c6, white's ability to play alongside castle. So here's how you should study an opening. Besides learning the structure, the main highlights of the opening, and what are the typical things and goals you have along the way, the scheme of your pieces, remember to prepare against your opponent's most direct attacking opportunities, because the quiet lines are not going to bother you. The quiet lines are not as scary. The tactical lines, for example, white's ability to play alongside castle in g4, is what works. And when you're preparing against sharp tactical lines that actually require some more theory, a very good question that some people have asked me is, Valeri, how do I get to learn and understand all those, variations and variations of theory? And then I have just one answer. Don't. Try to just see the sequence of moves. Like, for example, you can say queen c7, b5, bishop to b7, or rook b8, like it could work here. And then remember the main purpose behind it. So the sequence and the main purpose. Same thing about white. You can count the number of moves if you want, if that would help, but really that's it. And so essentially we see now, without actually trying to remember, like I go here, he goes there, or calculate it, you could see the versions for each side going. You could see your opponent's attacking opportunities, and you could see your own counterplay just the same way. And then you can start to look through the variations to see how to make it faster or whatever. But by remembering not move by move, but trying to remember a sequence of moves, you really learn and memorize openings. Remember that little thing that so many players don't know. Sequence, not moves. When you want to learn opening, do not learn single moves. You forget the moves. You try to understand the ideas, try to follow the plans, but most importantly, try to remember the sequences that follow those ideas and plans. That way, you wouldn't memorize moves, but you will remember the plans and its sequence. So, okay, well, basically that's it. I hope that you enjoyed this this lecture. Now, again, if you have any other questions, please do send them to me. I'll be more than happy to help out. And just once again, do not forget to check the link below the video, which actually includes 50% off the newest training, like online training package that the iChess is offering, of like the ideas behind openings. It has 16 hours of training with a 50% discount. It's a pretty effective learning tool, and I think you're all going to appreciate it. And I just got two more questions that I want to answer before we call it a day. So one of you asked, Valeri, do you recommend a Sicilian Kalashnikov? Yeah, I like the name. Kalashnikov, it's great. It's a good system, actually. Between the Sveshnikov and the Kalashnikov, we have very different systems. Kalashnikov is more straightforward and literally more limited, and Sveshnikov is more theoretical and, of course, more rich. But they're very different openings. The only similarity between them, I'd say, is the fact that Black is relying on, pushing White away from the center at the cost of his d6 pawn. So you can choose both, depending on which one suits you better. So one of you asked, Valeri, what you will in such positions? What I will? I mean, what you will do, I suppose you want to say. In such a position when you see the opening that you have no idea of a middle game plan. Okay, I suppose you're asking, what do you do in a position in which you don't know what to do in the middle game? Well, I mean, that's the topic with the middle game, obviously. If I have no idea where my middle game is going to go with the opening, I'll try to guess which area eventually I'm supposed to start playing. And so that's true. Okay, so now one of you asked, Valeri, do you recommend playing longer games or shorter? Definitely longer. Shorter games may be good to actually, let's say 10-minute games, not less than that, could be good for just practicing a number of games against people or against the computer, for example, on a specific opening. That way you could see what works and what doesn't within the lines, but just for the opening, not for anything else. Yeah, so Scheveningen, this was the Scheveningen. Yeah, it's one of my favorite as Black, and I'm covering that within the actual training that package. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that I was able to provide some insight on what to do and what not to do about openings. I hope to see you next Saturday. It's going to be next Saturday at the same time with a very exciting new topic. And so have a good time, and I'll speak to you soon.